You have probably picked up 1,000 of them in your life, and you have probably never turned one upside down to look. A wine bottle, the dark green or amber glass cylinder you grab off a shelf or pull from a wine rack. If you flip one over, you'll find a deep cone-shaped indentation pressed into the bottom. The technical term is a punt, sometimes called a kick-up. Almost every wine bottle in every wine shop on every continent has one. Champagne bottles have especially deep ones. Cheap table wines have shallower ones. The dimple is so universal, it has stopped registering as a design choice. But it is one amorphified 17th-century glass-blowing solution to a structural problem the bottles haven't actually had for over 100 years. Here on the reason why. Pull a bottle of wine off any shelf and flip it. Press your fingertip into the bottom. You will feel a cone pressing up into the bottle. Some are deep. Champagne can have a punt 3 inches tall. Some are shallow. A cheap Merlot might have barely a centimeter. But every glass wine bottle on earth has one. Every Bordeaux, every Champagne, every Pinot, every box store Cabernet. The shape is universal across every wine-producing region. It is notably absent in non-wine bottles. Beer bottles are flat. Liquor bottles are flat. Olive oil bottles are flat. The punt is exclusive to wine, and the reason is a 17th-century glass-blowing problem that nobody has anymore. The story starts around 1630 in England. The English glass-blowing industry had just transitioned from charcoal-fired furnaces to coal-fired ones. Coal burned hotter. Hotter glass meant thicker, stronger bottles. But the human craft of free-blowing was still uneven. A glassblower would pull molten glass from a blowpipe, swing it in a mold, and press the base flat against an iron plate. The flat-bottom strategy did not work. Half the bottles came out with a slight bulge. They wobbled and tipped over. The other half came out with stress fractures along the seam where the flat base met the cylindrical wall. They shattered when filled with carbonated wine. A clever bottle maker, history doesn't preserve the name, solved the problem with a single move. While the glass was still molten, the artisan would press a wooden tool up into the base and push the soft glass upward into the bottle's body. The base was no longer flat. It was a thin glass dome curving up into the bottle. The dome had 2 structural side effects. First, it removed the seam where the flat base met the cylindrical wall. The dome smoothly arc-blended into the side, no fracture line. Second, the bottle had a perfectly stable rim, a circular ring at the very base that touched the table evenly. And here is where the engineering survived its problem. By 1820, glassblowing had been mechanized. Bottles were now pressed into iron molds. Modern wine bottles can have a perfectly flat bottom. No punt required. But the punt stayed. 3 reasons. 1. Sommeliers had developed a grip technique where the thumb sits in the punt, allowing controlled one-handed pour. The punt became a tool of professional service. 2. A deeper punt requires more glass and signals an expensive bottle. A 1990 study of 30+ wines found 92% had a punt over ½ an inch. Under 10 wines averaged a 1/4 inch. 3. Changing the mold was capital expensive, and consumers already recognized the shape. But here is one place where the punt is still genuinely functional. Champagne and other sparkling wines. The pressure inside a sealed champagne bottle is roughly 90 psi, 3 times the pressure inside a typical car tire. The bottle has to hold that pressure without exploding, and the weakest point of any pressurized cylinder is its end cap. A flat end cap concentrates stress at the corners. A domed end cap, the punt, distributes that stress evenly across the curve. The same engineering principle that lets aircraft fuselages and submarines survive depth pressure. Champagne bottles have the deepest punts because the structural argument from 1630 is still load-bearing on a 98 TSI vessel. Walk through any modern wine shop and you'll see the punt operating as a coded language. The wine industry is one of the few consumer categories where the packaging is the primary differentiator on a shelf. Bottle weight, glass thickness, label paper, foil capsule, and punt depth are all signals. And the punt is the most legible because the consumer picks up the bottle and feels it. Heavy bottle, deep punt, premium pricing. Some American craft wineries ship in flat-bottomed bottles to reduce shipping costs. The wines are good, but sales tests show consumers consistently rate the same wine as cheaper tasting from a flat-bottomed bottle. The signal does its work even when the wine doesn't. So the next time you pull a bottle of wine off the shelf and feel the cone pressed into the base, remember, the punt is not a cost-saving trick and not an aesthetic choice. It is a 1006-30 structural fix that solved a problem the glass industry stopped having 2 centuries ago. The fix stayed because sommeliers built a grip around it, marketers built a price signal around it, and consumers learned to feel for it as a quality cue. Every wine bottle on Earth carries a 17th-century English glass-blowing technique in its base, ticking quietly under your fingertip every time you pour. Look at the next bottle of wine you pour. The cone pressed up into the base is the most successful piece of 17th-century industrial design you have probably ever held. The original problem, flat-bottomed hand-blown glass bottles wobbled, cracked, and shattered under pressure, disappeared in the 1820s when bottle making was mechanized into precise iron molds. But the punt stayed in 3 layered ways. The wine service industry learned to grip a bottle with thumb and punt for controlled one-handed pour. The wine marketing industry built a price signal around punt depth. A 1990 study found 92% of premium wines had a deep punt versus a 1/4 inch on bargain bottles. And champagne bottles still need the punt structurally because a sealed champagne bottle holds roughly 90 st, 3 times a car tire, and a domed end cap distributes pressure, stress, the same way a submarine hull does. Every wine bottle on every continent carries a 1630s English glass-blowing fix in its base. Most of those bottles don't need it for structure anymore. They keep it because consumers learn to feel for it and rate the same wine as more premium when it's there. The punt is not a structural feature. It's a 400-year-old habit, ticking quietly under your fingertip every time you pour, and every time the dinner party host hands you a glass without thinking about it. If this kind of small historical fix, quietly shaping your daily life story, is your speed, there is a whole channel of stories like it. The reasons behind everyday objects you have stopped questioning. Subscribe so the next one finds you and quietly lands in your feed without you having to look for it once. Or remember to check or hunt through your subscriptions list.